Hey everybody, welcome to week 4 of cognitive psychology here from Dr. Kirby's living room. This week we'll be talking about pattern recognition, which is our second cognitive skill we'll be talking about this semester. Let's get started. Pattern recognition can also be called perception. Remember, for this week you need to read all of chapter 4 and complete collaborative quiz 2. So we're going to start by defining these two perceptual systems we'll be digging into later in the chapter, go through some bottom-up processing theories, talk about how top-down processing works, and then talk about some conditions in which people have pattern recognition deficits. And looking at those deficits can sometimes help us understand the skill of pattern recognition even better. We're going to begin by introducing again this information processing model, where we have information coming in on the left, going into very brief sensory memory that we talked about in our attention chapter. If you pay attention to that's what the second arrow is. We have information moving into short-term or working memory, where you can then keep refreshing that information. Information also goes from short-term or working memory into long-term memory by a process called encoding, and we can pull it back out from long-term memory to remember things that happened longer ago through a process called retrieval, bringing it back up into our short-term or working memory. I would say that this pattern recognition process we're talking about happens at short-term or working memory because we are taking things in that are new, coming in from the left, and we're going to be comparing them to things we have seen before. It's going to fit a pattern that we already know. And so we'll also be thinking about this, especially this retrieval process here and this encoding process. We tend to save new experiences away as part of a pattern. And in order to recognize as part of that pattern in the first place, we have to kind of remember that pattern from long-term memory. So to define pattern recognition, we need to differentiate between sensation and perception. Sensation is when your sensory organs actually just initially receive energy from the environment. Your eyes detect changes in electromagnetic radiation. Your ears detect sound waves of vibrations from the way objects move. And initially that gets encoded into our nervous systems. But perception happens all in your brain, not in your skin, not in your eyes, not in your ears. It's all in your brain. It's the process of transforming and interpreting that sensory information. So not only are we just seeing kind of a jumble of electromagnetic radiation, we are identifying what we see to perceive shape, color, motion. We can identify a moving car as we're trying to cross the street as a car and know how to respond to it. And so that perception process is really a process of pattern recognition that we're about to zoom in on. We have two systems of pattern recognition. One is a data-driven system, and the other is a conceptually driven system. That data-driven system is called bottom-up processing. It's driven by the stimulus pattern or the incoming data. This means we focus on the details first in order to recognize the pattern, not the bigger picture. We look at the details first and then we get the bigger picture. A conceptually driven processing system is also called top-down processing. That is when we notice the big picture first. Based on stuff that we already remember, we kind of fill in the gaps and already and we end up seeing what we expect to see, basically, because we already know that what we're seeing fits a certain pattern. So we use context and higher level knowledge to influence lower level knowledge processes. If I were to use an old adage to help explain this, and this is how I remember top down and bottom up, I would say if somebody says you can't see the forest for the trees, that means you're missing out on the bigger picture because you're focusing on the details in front of you. So if you look at a patch of woods and you are focusing on the individual trees first and then realizing you're in the woods, that is bottom-up processing. You see a tree here, a tree there, tree, tree, tree. It's woods. If, on the other hand, you kind of notice the woods first, that like 30,000 foot view, there's a patch of a whole bunch of trees. You may not even see individual trees. Just like you may not even see leaves on trees if you have poor vision. You might see kind of a green blob at the top of a tree, but you know there are individual leaves there. You don't even have to see them because it fits a pattern. You know this is not some green blobby thing you've never seen before. You have seen trees before. You expect there to be leaves on them. When you see something that sort of matches up with that expectation, you realize it is part of that pattern. So you are first applying your previous knowledge and your expectations to make sense of what you see.